You ever meet someone who seems just a little too perfect? They say all the right things, they remember your birthday, they offer help before you even ask. But for some reason, when you walk away from them, you feel drained, confused, like your instincts are whispering something your mind can't explain yet. That's how evil works these days. It doesn't wear horns. It doesn't need to shout. It flatters. It listens. It studies your weaknesses like a map. And before you know it, you're apologizing for things you didn't do. You're questioning your own memory. You're shrinking, slowly, quietly, so they can grow in your place. Stoic philosophy doesn't talk about demons or devils the way religion does. But it does teach us this. The greatest danger to your soul is not the obvious enemy. It's the one who makes you forget your own mind. Marcus Aurelius wrote that the soul becomes betrayed with the color of its thoughts. But what happens when someone else is choosing the colors? Today's darkness doesn't scream. It seduces. It quotes spiritual books. It calls itself awakened, enlightened, helpful. But underneath the charm, there's corrosion. I'm not here to scare you with superstition. I'm here to help you see what your gut may have been trying to tell you all along. Because if you've ever walked away from a conversation feeling small, ashamed, or hollow, but couldn't explain why, this video is for you. We're going to uncover 5 signs, subtle, disturbing signs, that someone in your life may not just be toxic, but deeply corrosive to your peace, your purpose, your freedom. And we're not going to fight it with paranoia or fear. We're going to face it with stoic insight, clarity, boundaries, and a mind that knows its own worth. Because when you see evil not for how it looks, but for what it does to your soul, you can finally walk away from it without guilt and without looking back. Sometimes it doesn't take shouting to dominate someone. It only takes a perfectly timed sigh, a pause long enough to make you feel small, or a look that drains the confidence right out of you. You start questioning yourself, not because someone told you you were wrong, but because they let you feel like you were. And over time, you begin to adjust. You tread carefully around them. You avoid saying certain things. You anticipate their moods. You apologize for feelings you haven't even expressed yet. That's not respect. That's control. And the most dangerous kind is the kind wrapped in kindness. They'll say, I'm only trying to help. They'll call it feedback. They'll call it concern, but it's never mutual, never open. You're the one shrinking. You're the one losing ground. And the worst part, you won't even notice at first because they're smiling while they do it. This is not love. It's not mentorship. It's not spiritual connection. It's silent manipulation. I remember a man I once worked with, sharp mind, great instincts, emotionally aware, a strong leader, or so he thought. Until his personal life began to unravel. He had a partner who never yelled, never accused, but she would say things like, I just thought you'd understand me better. I guess I'll just deal with this alone. You always have time for others, but when it comes to me. And so he began to shift, to prove himself. He skipped trips with friends, canceled meetings, reworked his entire schedule around her emotional forecast. But no matter what he did, it was never enough. When he came to me years later, he said something that stuck. I don't know who I am anymore unless she approves of it. That's when I knew. He hadn't just been in a relationship. He'd been in a quiet war, a war against himself. The Stoics had a word for this kind of erosion: corruption of reason. Because real manipulation doesn't begin outside of you. It begins when you start doubting your own clarity. And that's what makes it satanic in the truest sense. Not the costumes, not the imagery, but the quiet, slow betrayal of your soul's compass. Epictetus said, "No man is free who is not master of himself." But when someone makes you question whether your instincts are valid, when they make you feel guilty for expressing your needs, you're no longer living for yourself. You're performing a script they wrote for you. And if you've ever found yourself rehearsing conversations in your head just to keep the peace, that's not peace, that's control. There's a moment, sometimes brief, sometimes unbearable, when your body knows before your mind does. A tightening in the chest, a hesitation before answering. a feeling of walking on eggshells, even though nothing explicitly wrong has happened. Those are not personality differences, those are alarm bells. Stoic philosophy teaches us to pay attention to what is within our power, and that includes listening to these early warnings. Because the manipulator doesn't want you to pause and reflect. They want you to react, to scramble, to explain, to fix things that were never broken. They want your speed, because speed steals clarity. Next time someone says, "I just feel like you don't care," don't defend, don't explain, say this instead: "I'd like to take some time to think about that," and watch what happens. A healthy person will respect your space. A manipulator will panic. Because the moment you slow down, the moment you stop feeding the dynamic, they lose power. They can't twist what you haven't said. They can't trap you in guilt if you don't immediately surrender to it. That pause, that's your power returning. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself daily, you have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength. But control disguised as concern makes you forget that truth. It convinces you that disappointing them is more dangerous than betraying yourself. And slowly you begin to trade your own values for their comfort. If any of this feels painfully familiar, then this message is for you, not to scare you, but to wake you up. You're not paranoid, you're not dramatic, you're not too sensitive. You're simply waking up to the fact that someone has made your peace conditional and called it love. If that truth is stirring something in you, don't turn away from it, sit with it, examine it. And if you want a place to continue that inner work, this space, True Stoic Way, was built for that. We're not here to perform strength, we're here to rebuild it from within. So if this resonates, subscribe. Not just to hear more, but to remember more. Remember who you were before someone else's opinion became louder than your own intuition. There's a saying in Stoicism, what injures the hive injures the bee. Let's flip that. What clears your soul heals your life. What restores your reason protects your boundaries. What allows you to say no without explanation? That's not defiance, that's self-respect. And here's the sobering truth. Some people don't need to dominate you openly. They just need to get you to a point where you no longer trust your own voice. So if you found yourself apologizing too often, overthinking too much, silencing your gut just to keep someone else comfortable, this is your sign to pause. Not out of anger, not to punish them, but to come home to yourself. Because no one wakes up one day and says, I think I'm going to surrender my peace. It happens slowly, quietly, with 100 tiny compromises that feel like love, until one day you don't recognize the person in the mirror. And that's when it's time to remember what the Stoics knew all along. No one can steal your freedom, but they can convince you to hand it over. Don't take it back, one boundary at a time. Sometimes the danger isn't in what people do, it's in what they quietly undermine. You start to notice it in conversations, how they chuckle when you talk about kindness, how they roll their eyes when you speak about loyalty, how they call empathy weak and say things like, this world doesn't reward good people, it eats them alive. At first you nod, because maybe they're just being realistic. Maybe it's just their way of processing hurt. But the more you listen, the more you feel it. There's a pattern here, and it's not skepticism, it's sabotage. You see, there's a difference between asking hard questions and dismantling meaning altogether. The Stoics believed deeply in self-examination. Marcus Aurelius, emperor and philosopher, filled page after page with doubts, confessions, and challenges to his own assumptions. But even in his most painful reflections, he always returned to a single truth. If it is not right, do not do it. If it is not true, do not say it. That's the difference. True questioning leads you back to virtue. But some people don't question to find truth. They question to burn it all down. It often begins subtly, masked as cleverness or even enlightenment. They don't attack your values directly. Instead, they laugh at them. Oh, you still believe in that? You're so sweet. It's cute how idealistic you are. Wake up, the world isn't fair. Play or be played. They twist compassion into naivety, humility into weakness, morality into manipulation. And while the words may be wrapped in wit or charm, the message is clear. If you still believe in goodness, you're not evolved enough. And if you're not grounded, you start to absorb it. You laugh along, you nod, you start to edit yourself just a little. You hesitate before speaking about what really matters to you. And that's where the rot begins. Seneca wrote, "We suffer more often in imagination than in reality." But he didn't mean to abandon morality. He meant to use it as an anchor in a chaotic world. Because when someone starts mocking the very values that hold you together, when they celebrate betrayal as strategy, selfishness as strength, cruelty as just honesty, you're not dealing with edgy humor anymore. You're standing in the presence of a corrosive worldview. One that doesn't want to challenge the status quo. It wants to invert it. Inverted values don't just live in fringe ideologies. They often show up in the most unexpected places. Charismatic leaders, internet personalities, partners who seem spiritually awakened. But dig deeper, and what you'll find isn't wisdom. It's justification. A justification for taking, for using, for stepping over others and calling it alignment with the universe. They wear masks, authenticity, freedom, non-attachment. But when you translate the language, it means this: I don't want to be responsible for how I treat people. And the irony, they'll call you the brainwashed one. They'll say morality is a cage, that loyalty is for sheep, that empathy makes you weak. But listen closely and you'll hear the fear behind their performance. Because nothing threatens the corrupt more than someone who still believes in integrity. Nothing terrifies them more than a person who cannot be bought, flattered, or manipulated. Because that person has something they gave up a long time ago. A soul with roots. When you hold on to your values in a world that laughs at them, it doesn't make you naive. It makes you dangerous to those who profit from confusion. It means you can't be turned into a pawn. It means you still know north from south, even when the compass spins. And if you're watching this and feeling that quiet anger rise, the kind you can't explain yet, but feel in your chest, it's probably because someone in your life has been planting seeds of doubt, not in what's true, but in why it matters. Let me say this plainly. You are not wrong for believing in goodness. You are not outdated for practicing compassion. You are not weak for choosing principle over power. Here on True Stoic Way, we don't chase trends in thinking. We return to the wisdom that outlasts them. Stoicism isn't about being cold or detached. It's about being anchored. It's about choosing clarity over cynicism and holding the line when others forget there ever was one. If this resonates with you, if you've ever been made to feel foolish for still believing in decency, then this space is for you. Subscribe not because we have all the answers, but because we ask better questions. The kind that pull you back to who you were before the world convinced you to be someone else. There's a kind of person who thrives on spiritual inversion. They don't need to convince the entire world. They only need to convince you to stop believing in what you already knew was right. And once that happens, the rest is easy. You'll excuse their behavior. You'll second guess your instincts. You'll laugh at your younger self, the one who still believed in meaning. But here's what the Stoics would remind you. It is not the man who has little, but he who desires more, that is poor. Seneca, the same applies to truth. It is not the man who holds to simple goodness who is naive. It is he who abandons all meaning for the illusion of control. He is lost. If you've ever felt pressure to evolve past your values, stop and ask, does this make me a stronger human or just a more effective manipulator? Because real growth doesn't make you harder. It makes you deeper. It doesn't lead to arrogance. It leads to humility. And any path that asks you to discard empathy, betray loyalty, and redefine cruelty as truth-telling is not a path, it's a pit. So don't abandon what anchors you just to survive in someone else's storm. Remember, it takes no strength to tear down what others build. Real power lies in standing for something, quietly, steadily, unshakably, even when the world calls you foolish for doing it. And if that's the kind of strength you want to build, not perform, but live, then you're already walking the true Stoic way. Stay with us, we're just getting started. Some people walk into a room and lighten the atmosphere. Others walk in, and seem most alive when someone else is breaking down. You don't notice it at first. They might seem attentive, even compassionate. They ask questions. They listen intently when you talk about heartbreak, loss, betrayal. But there's something slightly off. They're too interested, too calm when you're in pieces, too curious about the damage, as if your pain were a puzzle they enjoy taking apart. It doesn't feel like empathy. It feels clinical. You try to brush it off. Maybe they're just good listeners. Maybe they're the kind of people who don't panic in crisis. But over time, you start to see a pattern. They're never around when things are going well. They fade into the background when you're thriving. But the moment you falter, when your voice cracks or your energy dims, they're right there, available, focused, almost energized. And then the realization hits. They don't come close to ease your pain. They come close to watch you drown. This is the shadow side of human connection. The place where empathy pretends to live, but where something darker operates underneath. It's not always malicious in the cartoonish sense. They don't cackle or rub their hands together. They just linger in conversations that reopen wounds, in questions that poke the bruise, in reminders that keep your suffering warm. And the effect? You stay in it longer than you need to, not because you're weak, but because someone keeps dragging you back into the story. The Stoics taught us that suffering is inevitable, but misery is a choice. Pain visits all of us. But whether we live in that pain, whether we build a home inside it, depends on how we respond. And part of that response, crucially, is recognizing who around us helps us stand back up and who secretly prefers us on our knees. There was a man I once counseled, quiet, deeply thoughtful, recovering from a brutal divorce. He told me about a friend who had been by his side through the whole thing. Always checking in, he said, always asking how I'm holding up. At first, it sounded like genuine support, but the more he talked, the clearer the picture became. This friend never asked about his future, only his past, never celebrated his progress, only probed into what still hurt, never encouraged healing, only highlighted how broken he'd been. And the friend never shared much of their own struggles. They weren't there to connect. They were there to consume. That's when we realized he wasn't leaning on someone. Someone was leaning into him, into his pain. People like this aren't always aware of what they're doing, but they are in some way fed by pain that isn't theirs. It gives them a role, a purpose, a position in your life. And as long as you're broken, they matter. So when you begin to heal, when you smile more, speak less about the past, make plans, they subtly sabotage it. They bring up old stories. They remind you of what he did or how she left. They phrase it like concern, but you feel it tightening your chest like a leash. You have to ask yourself, do I feel lighter after talking to them or heavier? Do they reflect back strength or keep me trapped in survival? Because real empathy doesn't linger in the wound. It holds your hand through it and then helps you let go. The Stoics wouldn't tell you to avoid pain. They'd tell you to face it fully, learn from it, and move forward. But what they'd also warn you about, especially someone like Epictetus, is the way people exploit that process for their own ends. He once wrote, "Men are disturbed not by things, but by the view which they take of them." A person who's fascinated by your pain wants to shape that view. They want you to see your past as permanent. They want you to believe that the version of you that suffered is the most authentic. But suffering isn't your identity. It's a season, a passage, a brutal but temporary place. And anyone who tries to chain you to it isn't a friend. They're a warden. Watch how they talk when you mention healing. Watch how their tone changes when you say you're doing better. Listen for the sudden silence when you no longer need them in the way they've come to expect. And if you feel the energy shift, if you sense a subtle disappointment in your joy, you've just uncovered the truth. They didn't want your freedom. They wanted your dependence. One of the most powerful teachings from Marcus Aurelius was this: you have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this and you will find strength. Your suffering may have begun from an outside event, but the people you let into that space, they shape what happens next. If they help you rise, thank them. If they help you sink, slowly, subtly, and always with a smile, recognize what they are. An anchor dressed like a life vest. You don't need to cut them off with drama. Just start speaking less about your wounds. Start sharing more about your goals. Start observing how they respond to your peace. It will tell you everything. There's something tragic about those who feed on pain. They're often wounded themselves, so disconnected from their own healing that they only know how to connect through sorrow. But their hurt doesn't give them a right to hold you back. You can love people, you can pray for them, you can understand their story, but you do not owe anyone access to your suffering. If someone wants your pain more than your progress, leave them behind. Because you weren't meant to relive the storm. You were meant to walk out of it and help others find the way through. You don't need to understand a language for it to affect you. Before we had alphabets, we had symbols, drawn in caves, carved into stone, etched into skin. And even now, when we scroll past ancient signs on a hoodie or a tapestry, something in us still pauses. Not out of superstition, but recognition. We may not know what it means, but we feel it means something. And that's where the danger begins. There's a kind of influence that doesn't argue with you. It doesn't debate. It doesn't explain. It just surrounds you very slowly, quietly, through repetition. The music video, the logo on a shirt, the cool design in a video game. You don't question it, you absorb it, like background noise for your subconscious. And over time, the meaning seeps in, not because you believe it, but because you stop noticing it. People often ask, do symbols really matter? The Stoics would answer, only if you care about your mind. Marcus Aurelius warned himself constantly to guard his inner fortress, not just against external events, but against ideas that wear beautiful disguises. The soul becomes dyed with the color of its thoughts. Now think, what colors are being painted on your soul when you constantly surround yourself with signs you don't even understand? There was a girl I met once, vibrant and creative, always surrounded by artistic chaos, paintings, fabrics, crystals, incense. She called it aesthetic. She said it made her feel inspired. But woven into her decorations were runes, symbols with ancient, sometimes sinister meanings. She wore them, slept under them, lit candles beside them. She wasn't evil. She wasn't even aware. But that's exactly the point. Symbols don't ask for your consent. They only ask for your attention. And once they have it, they shape your sense of normal. This isn't paranoia, it's perception. It's recognizing that not all influence comes in the form of commands. Some of it is designed to bypass your conscious filters. Just like advertisers repeat logos, colors, and slogans until you associate emotion with a product, there are worldviews doing the same to your soul. But this time, the message isn't buy this, it's believe this. Normalize this. Forget what used to feel wrong. That's the real shift. It's not about turning you into something dark. It's about making the dark feel normal. So when someone laughs at virtue, when cruelty is branded as power, when selfishness gets called freedom, you don't notice. Because you've seen the symbols 100 times, heard the lyrics, watched the shows. You didn't analyze it. You just felt something cool about it. And now your guard is down. The Stoics knew that vigilance wasn't about suspicion, it was about clarity. Clarity requires you to question what most people accept without thinking. And that includes asking, why is this image everywhere? Who benefits from this idea becoming fashionable? What does this not want me to question? The wrong answers are easy to spot. The right ones make you uncomfortable. I once knew a teacher who fought to have a new school logo changed. It looked innocent, modern, minimal, progressive, but he traced its design roots back to a symbol used by a cult that glorified hierarchy and domination. When he raised his concerns, he was dismissed as paranoid. But here's what he told me later. They weren't evil, they were just unaware. But ignorance has never been an excuse for influence. That stuck with me. We may not always choose what shows up in the world, but we can choose what we invite into our mind. So when you see someone, maybe even someone close to you, who's obsessed with certain symbols, who collects them, wears them, Post them constantly. Pay attention, especially if those symbols are paired with behavior that contradicts virtue, especially if they reject explanation and react defensively when asked. Because the real message might not be what they say, it's what they surround themselves with. And over time, those symbols speak louder than their words ever will. This is where the Stoic way becomes your shield. Not in fear, not in superstition, but in clarity. You ask yourself, what is this thing aiming at inside me? Is it strengthening my sense of virtue, or is it making me desensitized to the things I used to protect? Because that desensitization is the first step toward compromise, and compromise is the first step toward collapse. Your mind is sacred ground. What you allow into it, visually, mentally, emotionally, becomes your operating system. And it's not just about filtering out what's obviously harmful. It's about recognizing what seems harmless. But trains your gut to stay silent. So yes, the symbol on that tapestry matters. The charm on that necklace matters. The lyrics you repeat without thinking, they matter. Not because they'll curse you, but because they condition you. And when your values erode, not by force but by suggestion, you won't even notice you've changed until it's too late. If you've been watching this series and feeling a growing unease, not a fear, but a deeper knowing that some things around you no longer feel neutral, trust that feeling. Because clarity doesn't always come with a thunderclap. Sometimes it starts as a whisper. This used to feel wrong. Why doesn't it anymore? That's the moment you wake up. That's the moment you take your power back. Here on True Stoic Way, we're not here to panic. We're here to perceive, to see clearly, to live wisely, to guard the mind like the sacred temple it truly is. If you haven't already, subscribe and stay with us. Because these conversations aren't about control, they're about freedom. The kind that begins in thought, moves into action, and becomes a life built on virtue, not fashion. Stay sharp, we still have more to uncover. They speak gently. Their voice is calm, their eyes steady. They talk about energy, about vibrations, about consciousness and healing. They speak of liberation, breaking free from conditioning, from ego, from the illusions of society. But the longer you listen, the more you begin to feel something unsettling. Their freedom always seems to circle back to themselves. Their truth always seems to excuse their harm. And their awakening, it's not leading to humility, it's leading to superiority. This is the final, most deceptive sign, the illusion of spiritual enlightenment used as a mask for control. It doesn't come with aggression. It doesn't even look like control at first. In fact, it may seem like the opposite. They present themselves as wise, above it all, detached from drama, emotionally disciplined. They've done the work. They've let go of the ego. They've transcended duality. But pay close attention, not to the words, but to the impact they have on others. Do people grow around them or shrink? Do they inspire reflection or obedience? Do they challenge themselves or only everyone else? Because real spiritual growth, as the Stoics understood it, is never self-indulgent. It's never about appearing elevated. It's about becoming more human. Marcus Aurelius led an empire, but still reminded himself daily that he was just a man among men. Be tolerant with others and strict with yourself, he wrote, not the other way around. But those who use spirituality as a tool of ego do the opposite. They're lenient with themselves, excusing selfishness, detachment, coldness under the banner of non-attachment or self-prioritization. And they're harsh with others, calling any disagreement resistance, any boundary judgment, and any moral concern low vibration. It's a trap that looks like a path. You think you've met a teacher, but what you've met is a salesman with a product you'll never fully earn. Because spiritual manipulation isn't about offering clarity. It's about creating dependence. They'll tell you you're on the brink of awakening, but only if you follow them. They'll praise your insight, but only when you echo theirs. They'll tell you you're not like the others, but only to isolate you from the community that kept you grounded. And suddenly, you're no longer thinking for yourself. You're just trying to please someone who claims they're beyond needing approval. This kind of counterfeit wisdom uses the language of Stoicism, but strips away its heart. You'll hear phrases like, you need to detach from emotional expectations. Don't react, just observe. Pain is just resistance to what is. At a glance, these ideas sound stoic. They sound elevated. But what they often become is justification for harm. Because real stoicism doesn't excuse cruelty. It demands discipline within yourself, not domination over others. Epictetus lived as a slave. He knew suffering firsthand, and yet he never used his philosophy as a weapon against those who were hurting. He used it as a compass toward virtue, service, inner peace, not self-worship. False spiritual leaders, on the other hand, will twist ancient truths into New Age armor. They will call emotional abuse shadow work, call ghosting setting boundaries, call neglect protecting their energy, and call exploitation karma. The result? You begin to question your own emotional responses. You begin to feel guilty for expecting compassion. You wonder if maybe you are too attached. Maybe you are too sensitive. Maybe they are just more evolved than you. That's when they have you. And here's the trick. They never have to raise their voice. They never need to threaten you because they've convinced you that doubt is ignorance and submission is growth. And so you begin to conform, not out of fear, but out of a desire to be awake. Real awakening, the Stoics would tell you, is not about rising above others. It's about sinking deeper into yourself, and through that depth, reconnecting with humanity. It doesn't isolate, it integrates. It doesn't strip away duty, it refines it. And most of all, it humbles. You can always tell real spiritual growth from the false by how much space it gives others to grow. The real thing invites questions. The false one shuts them down. The real thing owns its flaws. The false one reframes every flaw as a secret strength. The real thing makes room for others. The false one quietly shrinks every room until only their voice matters. This isn't about judging those who are genuinely searching. We're all on a path. We all fumble. We all fall into moments of pride, ego, arrogance. But when someone builds a persona out of it, when someone wraps their selfishness in sacred language, when someone treats empathy as a weakness and humility as optional, that's no longer a seeker. That's a manipulator who found better branding. You might be wondering, but what if they helped me? Of course they did. That's part of it. False enlightenment almost always begins with real relief. You do feel seen, you do feel elevated, you do feel new. But what matters isn't how they make you feel in the beginning. It's what they need from you in order to keep feeling that way. And if what they need is your silence, your obedience, your admiration, your isolation, then what they're building isn't your awakening, it's your prison. A prison made of language, of rituals, of philosophies you're not allowed to challenge, of metaphors that always lead back to their superiority. And the bars are lined with praise. There's nothing wrong with walking away from those who once guided you. Some teachers are only meant for one part of the journey. Others never belonged on the path at all. But if you find yourself shrinking under someone's light, if you find yourself doubting your own conscience because their voice got louder, if you feel more alone, more confused, more ashamed since meeting them, then you haven't met a guide, you've met a mask, and it's time to step away. Real growth expands you, not your ego, not your social status, not your sense of being special. It expands your capacity to love, to forgive, to reflect, to own your mistakes, and to welcome questions, to serve, not just be served. That's the kind of awakening no one can fake. And that's how you'll know you've left the illusion behind. So now you've seen it. 5 signs, none of them loud, none of them obvious, but all of them dangerous because they don't come at you with force. They come through the back door of your mind, dressed as love, intelligence, charm, or enlightenment. The silent manipulator who chips away at your confidence one sigh at a time. The cynic who rebrands cruelty as clarity and calls compassion naive. The empathic parasite who thrives in your lowest moments. The symbols that don't speak, but still teach. And the spiritual guru who leads not upward, but inward, only to trap you inside their ego. They don't look like villains. In fact, they often look like guides, friends, lovers, mentors. That's what makes them so hard to recognize and so easy to excuse. But as Stoics, we are not asked to hate these people. We are asked to see clearly. And clarity begins with the courage to stop explaining away what we already feel deep down. If someone can deceive you, they already have access to your trust. But if someone can make you deceive yourself, that's when your freedom truly begins to disappear. So if any part of what you've heard today stirred something in you, if you feel like you've seen these signs before but didn't have the words for them, know this, you're not alone and you're not crazy. You're waking up. That is the essence of the Stoic path. Not numbing yourself, not reacting with rage, but choosing to see things as they are and walking away from what no longer serves your soul. If you're on that path, if you're choosing clarity over comfort, growth over approval, and virtue over charm, then you're already one of us. Subscribe to True Stoic Way, not just for videos, but for reminders of who you really are. Share this with someone who might need to hear what you couldn't say. And leave a comment if you've ever walked away from someone whose light turned out to be just a well-polished mask. This is how we sharpen each other. This is how we stay awake. And above all, this is how we stay free.